Hello, my friends. We are back on my show today, and I am just excited to have a new friend and a new guest with me, Joelle Rabow Maletis, who's a counselor, and she specializes in trauma and recovery and just all sorts of stuff, somatic therapy. I think she mentioned earlier. I'm going to let her explain more about that. But since we're a show that talks a lot about creating skill sets for thriving and not just surviving, I thought Joelle would just be a great treat to have on our show today because her commitment to people and serving them from just surviving life to thriving is, I think we share that, don't we, Joelle?
We do. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to jump in and let you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Great. Well, thanks so much for having me on the show. I'm excited to be there and find out that we're like close proximity to each other. So that's even more exciting.
Yeah. Dinner date coming up.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. This is my second career. So I have postgraduates in education and actually dance. I have an MFA in dance, and that was in my other life, and then moved into doing therapy and did my dissertation on broad spectrum eating disorders, trauma, and PTSD. And as a ballerina, we can draw the dots. So that's another story for another day, right?
Oh, yeah.
I always joke and say, we go to therapy school to heal ourselves typically. At least that's what I tell my staff, right?
Yeah. Oh, we do. We do it for coaching too, Joelle.
Exactly. I know. So I started there and just had this, kind of shift in career and was really interested in trauma. And that lent itself to how we, hold trauma and how we think about trauma and how we experience trauma from more of this holistic perspective, and jumped right into doing trauma therapy and became a PTSD expert. And so I currently work with some really unique populations in the Bay Area, the San Francisco Bay Area. And so I get to work with C-suite, and I work with first responders, active duty military. So I've got a very interesting group of folks that I get to work with, and a great team. So that's a little bit about what I do.
Oh, I love that. I love that you talk about that with trauma, because there is some overlap in our fields with coaching and counseling. And I'm going to just do a quick nutshell that I tell everybody, because they always want to know what's the difference between counseling and coaching. And I say both are very valuable fields, and I hire both coaches and counselors in my own personal life. Yeah. But counseling is really that process of looking back and resolving things. Coaching is that process of moving forward. It's totally simplified, probably overly simplified explanation, but it's part of why I love working with counselors and love to refer out as well. Because when I'm working with a client that is stuck, I have a myriad of things I can pull out of my coaching resources to move them forward. But when it deals with trauma, I feel like it would just be almost cruel of me to keep trying to push them forward when they need to really slow down and look at what's happened to them in their life. And that's part of thriving versus just surviving. The surviving technique is really making sure that we just keep going every day. So speak to us a little bit about that.
Yeah. And I love that. And I do the same thing. I do, mostly therapy and a little bit of coaching, but I refer out to coaches all the time. And it's that beautiful, I think, symbiotic relationship, because we can't do it all. We don't necessarily have all the training, and it's unrealistic to think that we can. So I love that kind of connection and relationship, and having sort of this team response to, like you said, moving into this idea of thriving. So for me, just with my own life experience and then with my clients, it's this idea of how do we get out of, in the beginning with therapy specifically, right? How do we get out of victim ideology or a mentality, right? Which we don't necessarily choose, into surviving. And then we spend so much time saying, well, I'm not a victim anymore, I'm a survivor, right? And there's a lot of power to that in the beginning, but after a while, we start to stall out with that and we get stuck in that kind of groove or ideology mentality. And I think a lot of times people have a really hard time shifting into that thriving. And what does that actually look like? And like you said, some people need to go back and do the trauma work in therapy, and other people are propelled forward, but they don't exactly know what that thriving looks like. So I always, for me, say, there's a lot of power for me when I, like you, worked with a therapist, worked with a coach, and found this way to redefine, well, I'm not a survivor, because that feels like that takes away my power.
Yep.
Or it feels like I'm giving away power to those experiences that I spent so much time detaching from. So what would it look like if I'm the sum of all of my experiences, good, bad, and indifferent? And how do I move into being from this survival mode, which is re-traumatizing and re-triggering for some people, right? Into, okay, now I'm going to thrive. And all of those things were true about me. They don't have to be true about me anymore, right? I get to create this new narrative.
Oh, yeah. I talk about that in my book of true beliefs versus false beliefs. And when I was actually writing on the chapter surviving versus thriving, or thriving versus surviving, I literally wrote about how there was so little vernacular around the word thriving.
Yeah.
And we have a lot more around surviving, like survivor, survivalist, surviving, and thriving. It's like we have thriving. We don't have thriver. We don't have thrival. So I thought, I'm going to start making up these words. So I literally I think I called it survival versus thrival versus survival. And I thought I'm going to start using the word thrival. I use it so much now, I forget that it's not a real word. And my clients use it now too, because they're like, we're thrival. So I guess I want to speak a little bit to some of the things that propel us out of that victim and surviving mode. And maybe we've even gotten out of victim mode, but we've just way over identified with surviving. What are some things that propel us over into recognizing what it looks like to be a thriver in life?
Yeah, I love that question, and I'm super curious too to hear what your clients say. A lot of times people will ask me, well, how do you know? Like how do you know when you make that shift, or how do you make that shift? And it's such a great, authentic question, and it's so hard for me to answer, because I feel like, and I don't know if this is true, it's just the narrative I've come up with in my own head, right?
Yeah.
I feel like there was one day where I finally just said, I'm done. I'm just done with it all. I don't know what to do, but I know that I don't want to do this, right? And not even so much, but, more of like, and I know I don't want to do this. And, so what does that mean? And that's really more of a solution focused therapy model, not so what, who cares? It's not unimportant, right? So what does this mean? How is this going to affect me today? And at the end of the day, can I move into this space of, more of this DBT, or dialectical behavior model of radical acceptance, which is maybe I didn't cause it, maybe I can't control it, I certainly can't change it. So can I just accept it is what it is, because it is, and I don't have to like it, and I don't have to forgive and forget, because that's a hard model, I think, for people. So if I just move into this idea of it is what it is, and tomorrow's a new day, and I can try it over again tomorrow, right? And then practicing that over and over, and it sounds so simple and easy, and it's a simple concept, and in no way easy, right? It's painful, and it's triggering, and it's hard and frustrating, and all of those things. And so it was, starting to just stick with it, and then taking that model and replicating it with my clients and saying, okay, let me know how this works, right?
Oh, so yeah, I love that you said that. And what's hitting me as you're talking is it's very individualized. And I think that's why we probably both love what we do. Every single person, there is no formula. There's some general guidelines that we can definitely use and follow that is universal. But when you sit down and work with one human being, it's very complex. And an example is coming to mind. I'm working a lot with job fulfillment, career fulfillment. That's a lot of what my research was on, and emotional well-being and career self-efficacy. These are all things that I did my doctoral research on, and basically how to help people spiral up versus spiral down. And one of the things I'm seeing is this mindset shift of just saying, I have to endure my job versus I get to enjoy my job. If I can get them to just shift from this, what I call false belief, something that limits us, from I have to endure to I get to enjoy, even if they're not enjoying it yet. It has to start with that mind shift so that they can start saying, I'm open to the fact that maybe one day I will get to enjoy it. And I always call it, it's the too good to feel true or be true. That is but then we label it a true belief, and it shifts us out of that, not just victim mode or survival mode, but it actually begins to say, I'm open to a new possibility. And to your point earlier of I'm done and just enduring my job. That's what I want to try and tell people. I'm like, are you done? Because if you're done, I got a new belief for you if you want to try it. Another one I run into quite a bit is I'm a terrible communicator. I'm like, and you always will be if you continue to believe that. But if you'd like a new belief, like I can communicate, I can learn how to communicate, it can then open up new possibility. So it was hitting me as you were talking about that.
Yeah. And just, and how it's so easy for us to get stuck, right? In that false belief or negative belief system where, and some of it too, I'm thinking about when you're talking about job satisfaction is this place where people get stuck in the trauma where we're not going to have enough, where, the resources are limited. I'm spread too thin. For me, it was all of a sudden I found myself newly divorced with a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old in Silicon Valley as a dancer and went, well, I run a dance department, but that's not going to pay the bills.
Right.
And now what am I going to do? And then I had injuries and loving my job and the pain of not being able to do it anymore. And that it was a huge identity shift. And no background in psychology. It was interesting. I like I said, had postdocs and other stuff. And then when I made this transition, I ended up loving what I do now. Now there are parts about running a business that I'm not super crazy about, right?
Yeah.
But there was grief and loss around having to let go of this identity that I just didn't want to give up, and working with a therapist and working with a coach at that time who were really helping me figure out, okay, what was something I was going to love equally as much? And it took me a long time to be willing, right? To be willing to accept that I could love something else.
Oh, and I think what's so powerful is, and I'm just going to be very honest with all my listeners and with you, Joelle, as much as I teach this and coach on this, isn't it amazing how you are finding your own self living in a false belief? Or a limiting belief that is limiting you to a whole new possibility. And I love what you said about I had to grieve it first. And I want to say grieving it is so valuable and I want to always honor it. But we can also get stuck there, can't we? Yeah. It becomes part of our identity. I am grieving about the fact I'm not a dancer becomes then our identity of I used to dance and I'm still sad about it versus I used to dance. I'm sad about it. I've grieved it. And now I'm starting to look at what does it look to reinvent myself, to go after a new forming identity, to actually start getting excited about, oh, there's new possibilities out there. And that's just a tricky place. Have you seen that with clients where it's just, they have a hard time bridging that gap or they get really attached to their grieving process?
Yeah. And I think it's terrifying to let it go, right? For a lot of different reasons. And so just big broad brush, strokes talking about people. I think what happens is it's almost like if I let go of the grief, then I'm letting go of the thing, the person, the beloved pet, what the relationship, whatever is the thing, right? Whatever it is the piece that I'm grieving. It's almost like if I'm not grieving it, it's going to disappear, And so when, for with dance relating, for me and that story, like so much of it was, well, if I'm not in it and I'm not feeling it and I'm not grieving it and it's not painful, then I'm going to forget what it was like. And so there was this fear around letting go and what that actually meant. And I don't think I understood at the time. And it really wasn't until I went back to school and started doing this job and, like you, kind of going through clients, like I teach this stuff, but I'm human, I don't have it dialed in perfectly every day. And so there are moments where I forget and I wake up and it's like, my feet hurt, my hips hurt. And I go, okay, I got to go to the studio. And it's like, oh, that hasn't been my life in a very long time now. I forgot,
Mm.
so I think so much of it is, like you said, is just having our own grace for ourselves and getting out of that that negative
Mhm.
false belief, right?
Mhm.
Of,
Mhm.
if I let it go, then I'm nothing, I think,
Oh, I
right?
love that. Oh, that's a good one right there. If I let it go, I am nothing. Right there is a false belief that keeps us
Yeah.
stuck or
Yeah.
over identifying with grieving something that we're losing, or even feeling, I've noticed, almost feeling disloyal to the issue or the point or the identity shift. Like I'm not allowed to be happy for something new in my life. That's something I've come across too.
Yeah. Disloyal's a great word, right?
Hmm.
There's some kind of betrayal that's tied to
Mm.
that, right?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And it's, I think one of the things that's hitting me as I work with people is we don't hear it always ourselves, but isn't it amazing how we can hear it in others? And even as I'm listening to you, I was just applauding you, going, "Oh, I love that true belief." I mean, I heard it and I wrote it down. I get to reinvent myself.
Yeah.
That's where I meet people a lot. And in one of my chapters, it's called At the Crossroads. And that's where I meet people a lot. And usually they hire a coach because they're like, I don't quite know what's next, but I know what I don't want, is usually what I get.
Yeah.
I'm like, if you just stay in it with me, don't worry, because I wrote that book for me. Because I
Right.
have reinvented myself several times. And what I'm realizing is that belief alone has kept people stuck, or I should say it's propelled them forward. But the false belief of I don't get to reinvent myself. I'm stuck with the career I have, or I'm stuck with just um, being dissatisfied with it. And you either get to reinvent yourself, and it gets to look like a myriad of ways. You get to reinvent yourself and literally go back to school and choose another career path, or you get to reinvent yourself and stay in the same exact job, but talk to your supervisor, talk to your peers, start recreating the job description and see if they're open to it. There's just a myriad of ways that we can reinvent ourselves. But one of the false beliefs I come across of, I'm just kind of stuck with the life I got handed.
Yeah. And so I wonder too how when I hear clients say that, and especially, C-suite clients who say
Mm-hmm.
that, and they've accomplished so much, and yet they have these really limiting beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost this false imposed ceiling that
Yeah.
they're putting on themselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I wonder how much of that is trauma and how much of that is fear.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times what I hear people say is, there's this lack of resources and really
Mm-hmm.
challenge like there's that negative belief, right? And really
Mm-hmm.
challenging them with that.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean lack of resources, lack of love, lack of money, lack like what does that actually
Mm-hmm.
mean? And so many times we hear these messages, or they're so subconscious and deeply
Mm-hmm.
rooted, we don't even realize that we're saying them,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then when you start challenging it, well, tell me what that means,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Oh
There's
yeah.
this lack of connection of
Mm-hmm.
like, well, I don't actually know. Like, I don't know what
Oh
that
yeah.
means, you know?
I'm telling you, a personal examples coming to mind as you're talking, because I chose to self-publish my book, which for any of my listeners out there, you're nodding and smiling, so you know what that means. For
Right.
anyone out there, it means that I'm in charge of all the sales, all the marketing, everything. But I own everything. And it's also my choice because when I started working with publishers, the landscape has just changed so much.
It has.
So I just decided, well, I'm not saying never. I still think there's a value in going with a publisher, but I'm choosing to do self-publishing. But it's like a bit of a daunting task because I've never not only written a book, but I've never even sold a book or marketed a book. And I found myself starting to really slip into this kind of false belief of I'm alone in this.
Yeah.
And I was feeling low in the water about it. I was feeling very alone. And it hit me. I thought, that is a terrible false belief. Now I felt complete scarcity in the people around me and my ability to market all these different things because I hadn't done it before. And so I really had to shift into, it's okay. You don't know what you're doing, Heath, but you get to start believing that the right people are out there to help you sell and promote your book. once I started shifting to that, I mean, I literally had a call today with 2 people who are saying, we want to come on board to help you. And I need some associates. And I'm like, yes, please. And I have a whole other team, a publicity team that's talking to me. So it started happening. And it sounds a little bit like the law of attraction, which I have a love hate for, because I'm like, yes, it kind of is. And it's kind of not, because that law of attraction, it sounds way too simple, like rainbows and unicorns. Like if you say it, it'll come.
Right.
I don't find life to be that simple. But I will say, once I start shifting the mindset, it's not like it happens overnight. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it happens in seconds. Sometimes it takes a while. It's like you're starting to cultivate a mindset because you realize you kind of were cultivating this mindset. Oh, I'm kind of alone in this. I'm kind of alone in this. And I was cultivating that, feeding that thought, but I couldn't hear it until I really got still. So I guess that's what I want to ask you, Joelle. What do you recommend to help people hear some of this mind chatter that's going on in their mind?
It's a great question. Books like yours, journaling, there's so much. So I think, for me, I'm always looking at sort of this holistic mind, body, spirit, and defining spirit that for some people, that's just their own internal ethos, right? Or ego. For other people, it's a connection outside of themselves. Some people that's religious. So however someone wants to define spirit for their own personal use, right? So touching on all of these different points, doing some journaling, really paying attention to the voices. And with my clients, a lot of times we're identifying, well, whose voice is that? Is it yours? At what age? Are you 10? Are you 20? Are you 50? Like, where are you getting stuck? How old are you? Or whose voice is it? A lot of times people will say, oh, it was my coach when I was blah, 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 or it's my parent, or it's an instructor I had at university, whatever it is, right? People will hear something very specific attached to that negative messaging that they keep getting. And it's like, can we identify them? There's a great book. It was written a long time ago. It's not new, and it hasn't been updated in many, many years, but it's called Taming Your Gremlin.
Oh, I read it. I absolutely loved it. Yes, for my doctoral courses. It was actually for my PhD course in coaching.
Yeah, me too. It's an old, it's an oldie but goodie.
Yes.
But I love how Rick kind of puts that perspective of, okay, take that voice and externalize it, take it out of yourself, and then draw what does that actually, what monster does that actually look like, right? Yeah. And give it a name and interface with it. And so I use a lot of those kinds of externalizing techniques. I assign reading, journaling, art. There's so much movement, get out and move. And people think, well, I have to exercise, right? And it's like, no, just get out and move your body. If you're in your head, get in your body. You're spinning in it and you can't break the thought cycle. Take a shower, hold an ice cube, go out for a walk, do some kind of exercise. But being in your body helps break the spinning and the monotony of some of that, internal voices or messaging that we're hearing, right? And when you're in your body, people who talk about anxiety, where they have a lot of physical symptoms, stomach aches, headaches, they, maybe sweating, sweaty palms, right? Shaky, getting them into their head, right? Journaling, answering questions, worksheets, reading, some kind of prompt helps get them out of that physical component. And then using a lot of meditation, mindfulness, yoga, deep breathing, and any combination of that stuff. There's some great free apps out there. I think people are afraid of meditation because they think that they have to sit still. And so there's so many beautiful things that are 30 seconds or taking a walking meditation and listening to your favorite playlist or your favorite podcast, right? Yeah. Like all of those things count. And so I'm always looking at having clients pick a few things that they can start developing a healthier relationship with, listening to that internal cueing and voice and what it's trying to say.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I love that. It makes me think of my counselor working with me years ago about focusing on my central nervous system. And I was like, huh? Like, I can't even think about what does that even mean? Right. But I didn't realize how it was very easily excitable if that makes sense. And almost I'd liken it to a dripping faucet where it just felt like it was just dripping, 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 tapping, tapping. So you're just starting to feel your adrenaline going up. And this is, for me, it was the cause of internal anxiety. I had this ability to mask it and not show it externally, but I was holding it inside, and that was just my normal. So it was so powerful to start recognizing how to listen to your body. Then as I listened to the body, I was able to start really paying attention to what my mind was chanting kind of behind the scenes. And some of it had started so young that I didn't have words for it. So I had the feelings in my body. And then as an adult, I got to put more words to it. And I go, oh, I've got this tremendous fear that I'll always be alone. Well, when I go and do a new thing, like sell a book or write a book, and that old fear will creep up. And even though I'm 52 years old, that old fear creeps up and makes me think a little bit of trauma and some of the work that you do. And sometimes it just takes one experience that can really feed those false beliefs and create this internal dialogue, or monologue, I should say, where you're just kind of berating yourself, or you're not really for yourself internally.
Yeah. And it's so easy, right? It's so easy to go into the negative, and it's so hard to focus on neutral or positive, right? And especially, like you said, when you get used to managing that fight, flight, freeze reaction, that central nervous system or the autonomic nervous system, where everything's just boiling all the time, and you start resonating higher, you kind of hum higher. We stop paying attention to what's going on externally, right? We really start almost hyper focusing on our internal experience, and then our external kind of matches, right? And so, things feel very chaotic. So then my life is very chaotic, and my thoughts are chaotic. And so we kind of start to match. And so sometimes it takes a lot of effort and energy to get our body to calm down a little bit. So I always think about it as like a dimmer switch, right? Most people go on and they go off.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And the idea is when you have trauma, and what's traumatic to me is not necessarily what's traumatic to my clients, or vice versa, right? And trauma's in the eyes of the beholder. If somebody comes in and they said, this thing was traumatic for me, then it's traumatic, right? And so having them start to learn how to bring that as a dimmer switch, like bring it down a little bit, because that reaction is what keeps us safe as humans. So we don't want to get rid of it. We just don't want it firing off all the time, right? Where it's constantly coloring everything we do, everything we think. Right. So really starting to work with, how do we take that response and bring it down a notch a little bit, if that makes sense.
It totally does. And one of the things that I've noticed with leaders, as I've worked with them and people who are really thriving in life, this is a question that I ask all of my guests, if I can have the opportunity to. I begin to notice that we have these morning rituals, how we start our day. Okay, you're already nodding and smiling for those of us who can't see your face, but it's what I have learned too, to kind of listen to my body, to regulate my emotions, to hear what I'm telling myself, to get back in my body and make sure that I keep myself integrated and whole throughout the day, and give my best to my family and my clients, anyone I'm crossing paths with. But I have morning rituals. So I guess I want to ask you, what's your morning ritual?
Oh, you're going to laugh. So I heard this thing a couple years ago about, I want to say it was a very high-ranking military official that gave a graduation speech about making your bed every day.
Oh, yeah.
But I actually start my day off by making my bed every day. Now I will self-disclose, have been in this terrible habit of rolling over, picking up my phone, and then starting to respond to work emails which is terrible.
That is, Joelle.
It is absolutely terrible. So I'm working really hard at breaking that habit. Yes. And now the phone lives in the other side of the room because—
Good job. That's my number one tip I give my clients. Like, do not touch email till you've done whatever morning ritual you need to do to get yourself centered.
Like I said, I teach this stuff, but I don't know, sometimes.
I've done it too.
Oh my gosh. So I get up, make the bed. I typically go downstairs and kind of, make my morning tea and, do all of that stuff and my smoothie.
Yeah.
And then kind of head back to hopefully try and get some stretching in. If I can get a workout in, great. But I really I start with something physical for me, and that helps me. For me, that is meditation. It helps me center. I find a yoga practice for me in the morning is a little too sedating, and I just want to go climb right back into bed. So I tend to have something that's a little bit more engaging, but that's just me personally. And then I have a lot of, you'll laugh again, I have a lot of time where I am, I take a shower and I linger in the bathroom and nothing else is going on. I think it's just, I'm starting to think about my day and if I'm on a podcast, right, what I want to talk about or what clients I'm going to see. And I've got a staff, I'm a clinical supervisor. So, kind of what's the day going to unfold and look like, and just really have time to think. Sometimes I'm the most creative, where I'm thinking about ideas and I'll jot stuff down, and then I try and start my day, and then I try and bookend it so I have some kind of routine at the end of the day. Again, leave my home office, right? Wash my face, change my clothes. And then that mindfulness practice I have at the end of the night. So I like a lot of ASMR, and which is sort of, it's a sound experience. And so I like that. I like guided meditation or progressive relaxation at night. And that helps me a little bit unwind. So
that's beautiful. I love it. I knew you would have an answer to that. So I had to ask, and I love hearing all my guests. Everyone's got something different, and mine is always changing as well. But I find it fascinating that sometimes what worked yesterday doesn't work today.
Exactly.
Okay. And I always tell people, I'm like, count it as a compliment. The more intelligent you are, the more creative you are, the more you have to be aware what you need in order to feel fueled up and centered and ready to move. And some days it's like, I just need to be still. Other days, like I've got to run out the door and run, get my body in motion and listen to a song and I've got to be so active. Other days it's like stretching, and I'm learning just listening to what I need, but really that value of creating that space to care for yourself, mind, body, heart. And then to your words earlier, which I totally believe in, is your spirit. And as a holistic coach, I'm constantly watching all those. We hear the term a broken spirit. But again, I want to keep going forward. We get to have a thriving spirit. We get to have a spirit of inside of us that is fueled up and ready to offer back their best to the world, so they really can step into the life that they're made for.
Yeah, I love that. And I like semantics are so important. And so I really challenge my clients with, being maybe wounded versus broken, right? Are they really broken?
Yeah.
They may feel deeply wounded. And so how do we work with that, right? I do a lot too with every day is different for me. And so like the things that I do that day may be different, whether if I can get a workout in or a stretch or yoga or whatever it is. But I always start with making my bed. Like I said, I heard the thing and I'm like, this is really good advice. The funny thing is I used to do that as a kid, and that was not a standard my parents had for me.
Yeah.
There was something about needing things to be put together that made me that the chaos I was experiencing helped. It helped kind of put that in a nice package, right? And so I tell people now, look at your external environment. If you feel, if your desk is messy, if your closet is messy, if your space is messy, does that make you feel messy inside, internally? And if people are like, yeah, it's like, okay, let's make your external environment, right, reflective of how you're feeling internally. Yes. Other people are like, no, I'm comfortable. I have organized piles or whatever it is, right? So,
yeah. And I found that probably more of my sensitive nature, not only do I have to have order, but I have to have beauty. Yeah. It's not enough just to have order. It's got to be beautiful. It's got to be whatever. And You look at my office, I've got a gorgeous window I look out of. I have everything in its space and in place. I
Right.
can't generate or be creative if I don't have both art, beauty, or order
Yeah.
around me. It just allows me to feel very centered. It allows my spirit to feel at peace, and it allows me to really give my best self to whoever is in front of me.
Yeah, I hear you. And there was some really, really interesting and I think great research that came out of the last 3 years, really, with COVID and
Mm,
people starting to be more and more isolated. And some of it was fresh flowers, live plants really actually uplift our mood. And it
mhm,
helps so tremendously. That was something, right? And
mhm,
aromatherapy was another thing that helps, things that are
mhm,
citrus and scents that we love to smell really help
mm.
improve our mood and helps keep us center,
Right.
you know. So
That's
there's
beautiful.
all sorts of wonderful things that may seem fringe for some people,
Mhm.
and yet there's a lot of empirically based research that shows that it actually helps improve our mood, our creativity, but also our productivity too.
Oh yeah, well said. I see that. Okay, so as we wrap up, this has been so fun. I feel like I could keep talking to you,
I
but
know.
I guess we got to wrap it up for our listeners here. But I think I want to ask you to leave our listeners with some sort of encouragement. What is it that you want to offer them in moving forward and in choosing a life of thriving and not just surviving or even victimhood, but
Yeah.
really a life of thriving? What would be some great encouragement that you could give them?
Yeah, I thank you for asking. And it's been so much fun to be on the show with you.
Uh,
For me, it really does come back to where we first started talking
mm,
today about trying to figure out, okay, and so what? And so my
mhm,
challenge for listeners is really being very gentle with yourself when you're asking that question, right? Because we're not,
mhm,
and so what, who cares? But and so what does this mean? How do I move into solution? Even if it's just in this moment right now, get up,
mhm,
close the laptop, walk away, disengage from a toxic conversation, put boundaries in place, whatever that looks like,
mm,
right?
mhm,
Um, because it's those little teeny tiny shifts
mhm,
that start to create bigger and deeper and longer lasting shifts. And so really looking at what can I do in this moment right now,
mhm,
and and sticking with it, because like I said, simple concepts just so hard. It's
mhm,
hard to make those changes, and
mhm,
sometimes breaking it down into smaller pieces. And for me, it was really beginning with I'm just the sum of all of my experiences, and my team, when they hear me really stressed out or struggling with a problem, they'll hear me say that sometimes. That's my
mm.
mantra. I'm just the sum of all of my experiences, good, bad, and indifferent, right? And
Oh,
it's
I
like,
love it.
okay, get centered,
Yes.
focus on the next thing, right?
Yes.
And if I get it wrong, I have an opportunity to try it again. And if
Mhm,
I hurt somebody, I have an opportunity to apologize,
mhm,
and really for me, it's starting with that mindset.
mm. I love it. I love it. I think my mantra is I am being led and guided, but
Yeah.
it probably has to go back to, am I alone? Is there anyone out there? But just recognizing everything I do, I'm being led and guided. And so I get to
Nice.
ease into my world and my day, trusting that it's not all on me.
Nice.
Wow. Well, Joelle, thank you for your time today.
My
Such a treat to
pleasure.
have you. Where can my listeners find you?
Oh, it's my name. I know you'll drop all the stuff down in the
Yes, I will.
in the text below, whether they're watching on your podcast stream or on YouTube. But it's my name, joellerabowmaletis.com, and you can find us on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and let me know that you listened. If you have questions, we're always happy to answer questions, and we always have free gifts for your listeners, so
Oh,
they can DM me, and we'll send them the link.
I love that. Thank you.
Yeah,
And rate this show, listeners. That sure helps us a lot. I appreciate it.
absolutely.
Joelle, good to have you today. And I'm looking forward
Thanks,
to
you
when our
too.
paths get to cross.
Me too. Thanks again for having me. It's been a
Sure.
pleasure.
Uh huh. Bye bye.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us today. We'd love a review. Helps us out quite a bit. Wherever you are, just drop a review, and you can find out more at heatherpenny.com. Cheering you on.